Hey, what's going on everyone? I decided to take some time today to show you guys a bass tutorial of my tone. I know a lot of you guys have been requesting this for quite some time, and I finally found the time to go ahead and do that today, so I hope you guys enjoy. Just a little bit of background, I'm using a MacBook Pro 2016 15-inch model with Pro Tools 2018.4. I've been using Pro Tools for a couple of years now, so I feel pretty comfortable with it and haven't really switched to anything. My bass right now is a MusicMan Stingray 5. Use it in conjunction with Power Slinky strings. I've also used Theodarios in the past. I love them both for different reasons. And unfortunately, I had old strings on the bass. Didn't really have the time to go and get new ones, so that's kind of what I got stuck with. You'll see later in my processing chain that I tried to compensate for that, which is a bit of an inconvenience, but just a heads up. And as for my EQ on my bass going in, I had the bass in the highs pretty much maxed and the mids around 20 to 50%. And I'm using the pickup selector at 4, which activates the parallel inner voice coils. My recording interface is the Audient ID14. I've been using this for less than a year now. I've started out with the Focusrite Pro 40. Didn't really need the Firewire going forward, so I decided to sell that and go into Apogee, which I use both the Duet and the Quartet. And unfortunately, I had a couple issues with the way the drivers were handling within OS X, so unfortunately I had to sell that and landed on Audient. Great interface for the price, so all three are great companies. I can't really say one is better than the other. It's really a personal preference. I think at this point they all sound great. As you can see, we have Pro Tools running right now. There are a lot of plugins. I decided to redo my processing chain just for this video. I think it turned out a lot better than anything I've done before, so hopefully you guys enjoy this. So there's a lot to unpack here, so let's get started. So I recorded my bass track to this song called Well Wasted from Archetypes Collide. There's some good friends of mine from Arizona. I highly recommend you guys check it out. So when I'm done recording, this is how it will usually look like. I usually like to run my bass through 2 separate chains, a distorted and a clean. And I'll probably just print both of them since I'm already listening back through both of them. And this is how it would come back. So I usually use strip silence within Pro Tools. I'll set my parameters accordingly. I might adjust them a bit. And strip. So as you can see, it cut out all the silence, which I don't need. It's just unnecessary noise, especially when you have distortion. It becomes very annoying. And I'll also do a batch fade, kind of with the same parameters as I did with strip silence. I'll hit OK, and as you can see, it applied those fades accordingly. And if I need to, I'll go in and massage these. I'll do a quick playback. Yeah, that's how I would approach the cleaning process, but I already did that and then consolidated, so we don't need to do any of that. So I'll start off with the distorted chain. I started off with the Q2 from Waves. I have a low shelf, cutting a lot of the low end information because I am using the bass clean to handle the low end. And I'm also carving out the mid frequency around 500 Hertz. I couldn't get the bass EQ to get into that specific region, so I'm carving that out with this first plugin. So let's hear how that sounds. So yeah, most of the weightlifting with this plugin is done through that low shelf, as you can already hear starting off. And unfortunately, I am using the VMR to get back some of the top end information, which, as I mentioned before, I tried to get through the bass EQ, but I'm compensating a little bit more here with these 2 modules within VMR. Just a little bit, so let's hear that back. So I was just doing a little bit of touch up there. Next up is Saturn from FabFilter. You guys have probably seen this already. I had this for quite a while now, but I tried it out before, but I couldn't really get the settings that I wanted to, so I ended up using Bias Effects with the SansAmp module. That's probably what you've heard in my most recent covers. I ended up going back to Saturn and trying it out, and I stuck with it, so this is what I ended up with. I have the crunchy amp and the drive with this first band. I'm also dipping the lows again, and I have the crossover at 120 and this second crossover at 2K. Next up is this mid band, which is where most of the distortion is coming from. Used the heavy saturation, but you can choose various other ones. They're all pretty good for distortion. I would probably go in here and change the distortion type depending on the song, but I think this is a good starting point for most of the stuff that I'm doing. And I have the drive around 70%. Lastly, I decided to go with a different band for this top end information because I thought the heavy saturation was causing too much string noise. So I used a broken tube to kind of tame that a bit, and I have the drive around 52% for that. So let's hear how this plugin sounds. So not bad. Let's check out this next plugin, which will complete the tone. I'm using Amplitude 4, this Rock SVT 4.2 preset. I've used Amplitude for quite a while now. You probably heard it in a lot of videos by now. I did change a couple things from the starting preset, probably the gain and compression as well as the master. And I also like to use the noise gate from this plugin, so I modified that. Nothing in the stomps. The cab, I think I might have adjusted the mic a bit. I don't remember, and I always like to check if the room is down all the way because I don't like to hear that, especially when you're compressing. And then nothing in the racks, so let's hear how this sounds. So definitely adding a lot there. If you guys do have any other recommendations for amp processing plugins, I would definitely like to hear your recommendations. So leave a comment below if you have any suggestions. Next up is the SoundToys distortion plugin called the Devil-Loc Deluxe or something. I was trying out different distortions, trying to go back from scratch and try different things, and I think I stumbled upon this one and just happened to have Saturn on it while I tried it out, and I think they both complemented each other in a way that I really liked, so I ended up using both. But as you can see, the mix is kind of on the low side, so I'm not using it to its full potential, but it's a really good distortion if you guys are looking for something different. So let's hear how this sounds. So it really adds a lot of grit to it that I like, that I kind of felt the Saturn was missing, so I kept it. Next up is just a plain EQ, Pro-Q2. I use this all the time from FabFilter, also amazing plugin. Just cutting a bit of the low end and high end. I'm not really using a bunch of the highs, so I cut those out, and again, don't need the lows. Dipping a bit in the mids as usual, and then cutting a bit of the high mids that came out through the distortions while applying the distortion, I should say. Next up is a de-esser. This I use whenever I have fret buzz or string noise. It's always great to have as a safety. That's basically its only purpose. Don't really need a special de-esser for it. I just happen to use this one and it's working fine for me right now. I don't think this specific section calls for it, but it's just there. just in case. And lastly is this Dynamic EQ, which is part of the Ozone pack from iZotope. Just taming the high-end information again, just in case, especially when I start to play in the higher strings and the higher register. It's great to have as a safety as well. So I have the threshold there and taming it around 3.5K with 4 dB of reduction. Let's hear how it sounds. So not too much of a change there. Again, if it does come to it, it'll tame the frequencies that I find kind of annoying. So moving on to the bass clean, I have the same setup, VMR, kind of just boosting the high-end information. So let's hear that back. So just a little bit there again. Next up is this FG Gray compressor from Slate Digital. I don't like to do a lot of compression, and when I do, it's just a little bit at a time. As you can see, I'll probably have more stages of compression as I go forward. This one isn't doing too much at the start, it's just kind of taming the peaks a little bit. Next up, we have another instance of Amplitube, this one with a different amp model, the BA500. Started off with this rock preset, changed the noise gate, might have changed a couple of parameters here. Again, nothing in the stop, nothing in the rack. And I think I might have changed out the cab for the SVT 8x10. Might have changed the mic position, and again, check for the room. Make sure that's all the way down, and this will add a lot of low end to our signal. So pretty good starting out. Next up is the SSL channel. I just applied a bit of filters around the 55 and 18K. Doing a little bit of EQ, just shining up the high end a bit and just a little bit more there. Also doing some compression, a lot of compression I should say. Maybe a bit too much because the low end does get lost once I start applying the compression, but I'll compensate that in a later stage. I have the analog modeling off just because it does add a bit of noise to the signal. Just want to minimize that as much as possible. And I always check phase because whenever you have this type of setup, sometimes I end up losing low end due to the phase issues. I already checked for that and didn't really notice much of a difference with it engaged, so I just kept it off. But let's hear how this channel strip sounds. So yeah, I did end up losing a lot of the low end, but it did solidify those frequencies a lot through that compressor, so that's why I ended up doing that. This Renaissance bass is a master at low end, and I didn't really need to push the plugin that far before I regained back the low end that I lost. Highly recommend getting this plugin if you don't already have it. It's super cheap and does a really good job for what it does. So let's hear what it does to that low end. So you can really hear the fundamental frequencies coming out with this plugin, which I really like. I think the max bass, also from Waves, does touch up the low end a bit, but something about this Renaissance bass that I like richens up that low end. Next up is a saturation called the Radiator. Thought it really had a good character to it, so I ended up adding it to the processing chain. I backed off the input and output because it was giving me a couple of issues, but it still added enough character to where I could still include it in the chain. So let's hear how this sounds. So I did end up losing a bit of that low end again, but somehow this plugin just brought it back to life. So I don't know exactly how this compressor works, but I just fiddled around with it for this specific application and it worked just great. And let's listen back to these two together now that we've completed both of them. So not bad. I would probably be pretty happy with that tone, but I just wanted to see how far I could take the chain. So the first one up is from Kush Audio called the Clariphonic. It just does something to the top end that I really like. As you can see, it's clarity and focus, but it's just something about the top end that EQ or other plugins can't really achieve, so that's why I ended up using it. So just very subtle, opening up that top end just a bit, but I thought it was good for the chain. Next up is another compression from Softube called the Summit Audio. Again, just not doing too much compression here, just enough to tame those frequencies and glue things together. So yeah, really bringing those frequencies to life. And next up is just another stage of EQ. Again, getting rid of that boxiness in the 500 region. And then also taming some annoying frequencies that I found with the distortion along the chain. And dipping a bit of the highs just a bit. So we'll hear how that sounds. So you can see those peaks. You can see those peaks coming out, and that's why I decided to make those cuts as I did with this EQ. It's a great plugin to check for things like that. Next up is JST Clip from Joey Sturgis Tones. Not really, it looks like I'm not doing it a lot, but that's all I really needed for this chain, and it adds a lot. So let's hear how this sounds. It's a really awesome plugin. Definitely have to be very careful when using clip type plugins. It just needs to be used sparingly. And last but not least is the multi-band compressor, another one from FabFilter. Not gonna lie, I just ended up using this preset, didn't really modify it, I believe. And it really locks all of these bands into place, the low end and the highs, just in a way that I really liked. So that's why it's in the chain. So let's hear that. So yeah, that's my processing chain. Next up is just a simple EQ that I use on pretty much every track. I just plop it on, dip a bit of the lows, a little bit of the mid or highs, just to have the bass sit in the mix a bit more. Don't really need to massage it that much. And let's hear that, and let's hear it also with this Maximizer, which is a limiter that I use at the end of my chain. So both the track and the bass are feeding this master into this limiter, just to kind of glue everything together. So let's hear how that sounds.
It's just existing, so let time you spin. Be what we say. I'm trapped in my own head, so fading through right time.
So yeah, there is my processing chain. I'll show you guys a couple more plugins that I didn't make the final list, but I think are still good to include. Just some honorable mentions, I guess you could say. As I mentioned before, I used positive grid bias effects. This is the exact chain that I used the boost and this SansAmp drive. I wasn't getting as much top end as I could have, even with adjusting these two. That's why I switched over to the Saturn, but it still sounded pretty good. Next up is the Dark Glass Ultra plugin, a new one from Ultra DSP. I'm using the trial version. I tried messing with this for a bit. Couldn't really get it to the way that I wanted to. I actually own this physical pedal, and I really like it, but for some reason I just couldn't get this to get the tone that I wanted to, so I didn't end up using it, but I think it sounds good for other applications. So next is the SansAmp plugin, which comes stock with Pro Tools. This is what I ended up using when I first started out a couple years ago. It was just this plugin, no EQ, no compression, just straight out. Kind of horrible, I know. I learned a lot from this plugin and I still love it to death. Might go back to it at some point, but not right now. And the next two are amp emulation models that I think would be good for people starting out as well. First one is from Softube called Bass Amp Room. I haven't really tried this one in particular yet, but I definitely do plan to dive into it at some point. And so there's that one. And lastly, the guitar rig from Native Instruments also can probably get you a very decent tone. Really great UI, and you can probably really dive deep into here. So I'd recommend checking out these plugins further if you want. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you guys have any recommendations on things that I can do next in terms of tutorials, I'd be more than happy to listen to your feedback. If you guys have any recommendations on how I can improve the video quality further, I'd be more than happy to listen to those comments as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you learned something today. I'll probably do more tutorials in the future if I have the time, but until then, thanks for watching.